Good morning, Nigeria. Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. This is Rapid Done right here on Rapid Television, and this is the 9 o'clock hour. My name is Martha Alu.
My name is Victor-Oki. Welcome back, and of course, it is time for the big conversation. Welcome.
Yes. Now, there's been concerns about the growing rate of out-of-school children, and Nigeria is currently facing one of the largest education emergencies in the world. According to UNICEF Nigeria, about 10.5 million Nigerian children between the ages of 5 and 14 are out of school, making Nigeria home to one of the world's highest populations of out-of-school children. And these are reports by both UNICEF and UNESCO. Now, more recent estimates that include junior secondary education suggest the figure could exceed 18 million children nationwide. The crisis is not severe in northern Nigeria, particularly in the northwest and the northeast, where insecurity, poverty, child labor, early marriage, and weak educational infrastructure continue to keep millions of children outside the classroom. Globally, UNESCO estimates that more than 272 million children and young people are out of school, with sub-Saharan Africa carrying one of the heaviest burdens. But beyond these statistics lies a much deeper concern. Education is not just a social service. It is the foundation of economic growth, national security, productivity, and social stability. In fact, the workforce of tomorrow's generation depends on the quality of education that of today's gets. So the real question now is, what happens to a country when millions of its children are disconnected from learning, skills, and opportunity? And now we'll examine the scale of Nigeria's out-of-school crisis, the regional realities, how Nigeria compares globally, and what urgent steps must be taken to reverse this trend. And to join us today on the conversation is one with a proven track record, one who understands the ropes of education. She is none other than Mrs. Aderemi Emmanuel-Oki. She is an educator and a girl-child proponent. Thank you for joining us on the show this morning.
Thank you.
So good to have you here. I think this is like the second time we're having you on this show right here.
The third time, actually.
The third? Okay. This is household interview. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, let's move on to the very basics of our conversation. Nigeria has battled out of school children for crisis for decades. You know, and from the universal primary education era to the 1970s to the universal basic education, you know, reforms that was launched in 1999. Successive governments have introduced education, yet today we see UNICEF's estimates of the number of out-of-school children. Why has this crisis persisted for so long, despite multiple policy interventions?
Okay, so first off, it's alarming, actually. And in sub-Saharan, like you said, in Africa, we have a lot of children out of school, like you pointed out. Now, the first thing I would say, and this is prevalent more in the northern region of Nigeria because of insecurity. You know, insecurity is one thing that has really made it so. And then there's poverty in the land. There are so many reforms that need to be done within the education system that is going to nip this in the bud. Some children, we cannot, like I always say, eradicate it totally, but it can be reduced drastically. Number one, if there are no closures of schools, for instance, teachers, educators are always agitating for policies, for inclusivity and all that, a better remuneration for teachers, you know, but government, I know they are doing a lot, but there's a lot more that can be done, you know. But in lieu of that, if security is addressed in the country and there is access to education, for instance, in rural areas, there is no access to education. There are some villages, even in the south, that they don't have access to education, and it's more prevalent in the northern region. There is no access to education. And crisis-stricken communities, you know, when schools are burned down, razed completely, and there are no people inhabiting the villages, teachers are not, you know, they are not encouraged to go to school because of incessant insecurity. you know. So that's one of the things. And poverty. Let's talk about the Universal Basic Education Act that was recently reviewed in 2024. You know, if scholarship could be given to children that are very cerebral, you know, children that are very intelligent, but the parents don't have the wherewithal, the financial capacity to send these children to school. Scholarship could be given to them to encourage them, you know, to go into education, to go to schools.
Because you just highlighted some of the challenges that, of course, insecurity is a major issue. You talked about, just to recall, the Chibok girls in up until many of them are not back to their families. Also, the Koringa girls schools that was also attacked. But away from insecurity and poverty that you mentioned, recently in 2026, there's a growing concern amongst young people, and they are pushing the narrative that school is not necessary to succeed, you know, especially within the rise of social media influencing, crypto, forex trading, and all of that. The push by many young persons is that school is not necessary for any individual to succeed, especially in Nigeria. Do you think that this narrative is also a reason why it seems like many young persons now are no longer interested in getting to school?
Yeah, I wouldn't agree totally with that. That is why there should be vocational training, alternative formal education.
Yeah.
You know, there are some children that they may be late bloomers, they may not do well in academics. That's why, especially from JS3, that's Junior Secondary School 3, there should be alternative to vocational training. And the curriculum that was reviewed recently is, you know, said something about that there will be vocational training, other vocations that can be introduced into the curriculum to encourage our students not to stay within the classroom alone, like CBT. For instance, government schools, they don't do digital training for them. So when there's CBT examinations, they don't have the dexterity, you know, to be able to do that, to go on the computer and answer questions correctly and all that. So definitely it's okay it's very imperative for government to introduce that, so that other some students that are not proficient in academics can do that. The school where I teach is a government school. I'm a volunteer. I've been a volunteer there for almost 5 years now. There was a time I was in the school, in the classroom teaching, and a teacher came to tell me that I had a flat tire. So I was wondering, how do I do that, although I had extra tire? And then the student heard, and he said, "Oh, Obina is here. He can do it." And I asked him, "Obina, can you do that?" He said, "Yes." I said, "How so?" He said, "Right from his primary school, he's been undergoing automobile training."
Okay.
So he could do one or two things when it comes to cars. Another student, they call him Elon Musk. And I was even bemused. Elon Musk, why that? And they said, there is no electronic device that he cannot work on. He said after his GS3 education training, he's going into that full time, that he's not continuing with the senior secondary education. So vocational training can help.
Okay, now that you have spoken about vocational training, do you think that because Nigeria is so focused on traditional system of education, that's why we have the numbers pile up, like UNESCO and UNICEF has pointed out, because we have about 272 million out of school children? Is it because we are so fixated on endorsing the normal traditional system of education as the only source of education, or just like you said, we need to embrace fully skill acquisition and all other forms of education? You know, does one pass for the other?
Okay, so now parents need to be sensitized on the need for them to have a broad perspective to education.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want your child to become an automobile go through automobile training in GS3. So it still boils down to parents.
Mindset.
Yes, what they believe within the value within the family section or unit. Because this actually, I would say, is more prevalent amongst the low-income learners because of poverty, like I said. they don't have the financial wherewithal. So they will be like, okay, you can go ahead and learn 1 or 2 trades. Some people don't, they just don't give credence to education. They won't even allow their children to do formal or informal education, you know. So it's not because one trumps the other. So it still boils down to we need to sensitize parents. Parents should be involved in education. Family involvement or engagement in education is very important.
All right, just a follow-up to that. If we compare Nigeria's education realities for over the last 20 years, would you say that we have made significant or measurable progress? Or has population growth and some of the factors you talked about, poverty, insecurity, outpaced government interventions?
Not necessarily. There's been a surge in the population and inflation. Don't forget inflation. It's all over the world. And we are battling it everywhere. So inflation has really cut down on that. What I mean has really affected that. What I mean is things are very expensive, you know. There are no enough infrastructure provided by the government for government-based schools. So children, when they go to school, they don't have wholesome learning outcomes. You know, because dilapidated buildings, the roofs are leaking. I'm sure you have seen 1 or 2 videos where children, where students, especially in the corners, they sit on the floor to learn. How do you bring about positive learning outcomes in such situations? And then we need to train our teachers, our educators, especially in the government schools. Private schools are doing that. A lot of private schools, they are doing that. They train their educators from time to time. But they don't do that in government schools. So that needs to be done.
Do you think we have made progress in the last 20 years? Because, you know, research showed that, you know, at one point we had free education. At one point, learning was more conducive, where our laboratories were well equipped. That's the word. Where our laboratories were well equipped. We had teachers who, you know, were up to date and up to standard teaching in those schools. But do you think that those realities of the time when we were being told about and right now, do you think that they are commensurate?
They are not commensurate in the government schools, but in private schools, yes.
Why do you think so?
Yes, because I've been in the private sector for a while, for more than 2 decades, and continuous training are going on. Laboratories are being, you know, are up to date, at par with world standard, especially some private schools, not all private schools, definitely not, you know, at par with the world standard. But I must tell you the truth. Government schools, there's a whole lot of decline, because that's where I am now. There's a decline. So it's
quite worrisome, because again we think about the future of the workforce right now as we talk. Whilst we're reading the statistic earlier on, according to UNICEF, about 10.2 million Nigerians. That report was even in 2024, and in recent time they said that number is going to double to like 18 to 20 million, you know, Nigerians out of school. You know, but again, as an educator, what does this now tell you again for the future of the Nigerian workforce rather? How are we preparing our children, you know, for the workforce of the future?
Okay. I'll still go back to private schools, private sector in Nigeria. They are doing a lot. Might not be enough because of the surge in population, but the education minister, the new one that just came in, is trying his best. But you know, it's a system that has collapsed over the years, over the decades. So it needs a lot of reforms to be in place. The new curriculum that was just introduced last session is going to bring about a lot of changes in the education system. But we don't even have the manpower. We don't have enough qualified teachers to carry out these reforms in the education system.
Just to jump in very quickly, please. Those new reforms, are they being implemented now?
No, they are working on it. They haven't implemented.
So when is implementation time? Do you have an idea to that as an educator now?
It's an ongoing thing. It has started. They are going to recruit new teachers that would help with the implementation of the vocational training and some subjects that would help critical thinking, reasoning and all that in the government education sector. Yes.
Something I think that we're not really paying attention to right now is the fact that throughout this conversation, you've made mention of the fact that, oh, the private schools are doing it.
Right.
The private schools are equipping the laboratories. The private schools are working on curriculum. And it's looking as though education becomes that which is affordable to the highest bidder, which means that substandard education goes to people with little to no resources, while standard world-class education goes to the people who can afford it, which I think contributes to the number of out-of-school children we have right now. So how do you think that we can address this? Because it's an unfair gap, if you ask me. Every child deserves education. Yes. And the people who are now in power at one point enjoyed free education. So it should be accessible to all. How can we bridge this gap?
The first thing the government can do is to provide free education, at least from LEA, that's local education authority schools, preschool, primary school, at least up to JSS 3, the first section of the secondary school, you know. If they can do that, provide free education. I mean, they did it in the 1950s. I think I enjoyed that in the early 80s when I was in primary school. So that can be done. It's doable. So if the government can come back to that, then
what was it like at that time?
No, I wasn't paying. I was in primary 2, 3, 4. Well, primary 3 and 4 I can remember. My mom did not pay school fees. It was free, and we were given exercise books. We were given writing materials, pencils, rulers, and all that. And even some, like in Oyo State, Bolaige, he provided free uniforms to students. So everybody wanted their children to be educated, you know.
We can also see the issue of or the challenge of allocation when it comes to funds, especially within the federal government and the federal government-owned schools. In 2025, according to the report we have here, it says the federal government's 2025 allocation, education allocation, rose to about 3.52 trillion naira. But still, of course, many schools, public schools in 2026 still face overcrowdedness, poor infrastructure, shortage of teachers and all of that. Now the question is the problem more about accountability than it is about funding?
Enough money is disbursed, is pumped into the education system. But when we talk about integrity, when we talk about transparency, when we talk about accountability, there are lapses there.
Okay.
When you go around, not in FCT, but when you go to other communities, when you go to Call North, like I said, dilapidated buildings. You see it all over there. There are no desks, no chairs, you know. And we have, like you said also, shortage of teachers. Teachers are not even going into education anymore because it's no longer, it's not robust. When you are there, there are no incentives for teachers. It's one of the high calling when it comes to vocation, when it comes to job, you know, all over the world. So you need to encourage teachers. You need to give them incentives. You need to do what do you call it? Welfare packages for them. Those are not in place in Nigeria. So basically is the transparency and the accountability, because enough money, government, from the federal government,
right,
they are pumping enough money into the education system.
Okay. Now let's go to a bit of interventions and progress rate. Over the years, Nigeria has introduced about programs such as the Universal Basic Education, which you did make mention of, also the basic school feeding initiatives, the Safe Schools Initiative, and conditional cash transfer programs. Which of these interventions have produced measurable results? And if they actually did produce results, where have we fallen short? Because we have already established that there is a decline from what it used to be to what it is right now.
Yes. So the problem is continuity. They started it, but in some schools, it's not continuous.
Okay.
So that is
continuity is the issue.
Continuity is the issue.
Okay.
And there's something I have here called learning poverty, right? Where we have children in school, but they're not able to read, they're not able to write. Rather, I'm not talking about 2-year-old kids now. I'm talking about even people in their junior secondary school. I think we have a slide, you know, that talks in line with that. That was the recent report that was deleted very recently. Let me quickly get that out so that we can be on the same page.
Yeah, which it was the World Bank report.
World Bank report, which stated that only 30% of children age 3 to 5 can identify 5 letters, right? Only 34% can recognize numbers 1 to 5. That is for children within 3 years to 5 years of age. And also, back to the question I also asked, students in secondary school, GSS1 to GSS3, they also experience the learning poverty where they are unable to read and write even at the age of 14. What can be done to ensure that these as well can be remedied?
Okay, so that is why I advocate for Montessori method of teaching, where you use different kinds of resources to teach. You know, it's not just teaching in abstracts. You know, there are basic things. You put toys and all that to count, to read, you know, to be able to identify letters and figures and all that. Then we need to evolve. Teachers need to, that's why I spoke about training. Teachers need to evolve. Government needs to train teachers on methodology. From time to time, the methodology of teaching, of education should change, should evolve. But if you have a teacher that has not undergone any training in the last 5-10 years, it's still stuck in the past. Like the way we were taught in the 90s in secondary school, it's no longer applicable to how children should be taught nowadays.
But that's still the pattern students are taught.
Yes, that's still the pattern up to now, except in the private sector.
Okay. We had a conversation here last week. Where we were having I'm not sure. You must have come across Money Point's CEO's comments on, you know, the quality of the workforce right now. And while we were having that conversation, one of the resource persons we had on the show, Mr. Hakim, he talked about the fact that in universities, the people, or JAM now, people who don't perform well are taking over to the Teachers College, NCE, and these people are now supposed to be the legitimate educators because they have license, they have gone through the process or license training for that. This morning on the headlines, on major headlines, we had on Daily Trust, we had on the Vanguard, we had on Punch newspapers. All of these headlines carried that the federal government have now agreed that 150 is the cutoff mark for JAM, and
for universities.
What?
For universities.
For universities,
right.
And then 100 for polytechnics and
the NCE.
The NCE.
For the NCE, I think it stated that the NCE you don't even need the JAM to get that.
To get into that.
Yeah.
Now, I see a repeated circle, but I don't know what your thoughts are about this.
Okay, so that's a decline. Because if 400 is the cutoff mark, then 200 should be the average mark for you to be able to enter, to gain admission into university.
I thought so.
Yes, not 150. You know, 150 is for polytechnic during our own days, because polytechnic was 300. You know, when I saw that, it's the first thing that came to my mind is, why are we enabling mediocrity in the education system and in our students? You know, most teenagers, the youngsters, they don't even want to read nowadays because of their attention span. Right. They prefer to go behind the device and be pressing and be checking hours on ending, except you cop them as parents, except you put PG and all that on that. So I don't agree with that, in all honesty. If I had access to the education minister before that came up about, I would have said something. One. Then two, I remember that when I wanted to gain admission, there was a quota for northern Nigeria because they believe that they are not then. It's no longer like that. The narrative has changed. They are not into education, formal education. You know, they do more of nomadic, not all of them, but some of them, nomadic education.
Arabic.
Arabic, yes, whereby government is trying to integrate Quranic schools into the formal education system. But when I saw that, I would say bemused that why would that be a decline? You know, we are encouraging them to be lazy, encouraging students to be lazy once I have 150. Unfortunately, now let's go back to parental involvement. Parents are not helping. Even some children that had over 200, you would see that parents pay examiners, invigilators, you know, to influence their children's results. When I was young, when I was writing UTME then, I remember that some parents will pay other people in university to impersonate their children to write JAM so that they can pass. And then when they get to school, they are not able to cope with the dynamics, you know, with the rigor of reading and then passing, because it's more difficult for you to impersonate in university. You know that is, you will be rusticated.
We'll be talking about the implication of this to the education system. I know you have made mention of a bit, but we have to go on a very quick break. We've got into the half of the hour, and if you're just joining us, we have been having conversations centered around the number of out-of-school children. How can we address this? What are the realities on ground, and what interventions can the government bring about to curb these menace? But we'll go out on a very quick break, and when we get back, we'll keep up with the conversation. Please stay with us. All right, welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. It's still Rapid Done right here on Rapid TV, and we have been having conversations centered around the out-of-school children in Nigeria. Being with us throughout the morning is Aderemi Emmanuel-Oki. She's an educator and a girl child proponent. Thank you so much for joining us again on the show.
I'm happy to be here.
Once again, thank you. And before we went to that break, we talked about the federal government pegging the cut-off mark for 150 for university students, 100 for polytechnic, and of course NC student, basically. And we had a similar conversation just off air. But do you think pegging that number is a good way, you know, or what exactly do you think is going to be the implication of this number being pegged, first for university students and as well for the NCE students, knowing that these are the same people who are going to come out and then educate the next set of people?
Okay, so we're going to have half-baked graduates. First off, even before now, some people couldn't defend what they learned in school. Yeah, you know, and so it's going to get worse. It's not even a gradual decline. It's a sudden, abrupt decline in the education system, and then it's going to be so chaotic in the workplace. People that are not really educated, so to speak, how can you? 400 is the aggregate of the exam, the subjects they sat for, right? And then you are bringing it down, the cutoff mark, to 150 in university. No, that is totally wrong. That shouldn't be it. It's going to affect the workforce. It will definitely affect the workforce. Nowadays, you see youngsters in their early 20s and what have you. They get into work. They don't even have the tenacity, the grit to hold a job down. You know, any little thing, my mental health. They don't want to work. Yes.
But is that based on the certificate they own or on the individual themselves?
No, it's more of social media influence. Okay, so because everybody now. Some of them can't even defend the certificates because there is a rot in the education system in Nigeria. Let's say it as it is, and it's getting worse. For them to affect that, you will see in the next few years, you will see the kind of the quality of graduates that will be churned out into the labor,
just to follow up to that, because many have also argued that bringing down the number to 150 for university students, 100 for polytechnic, and of course for the NC student, that could actually improve access into the university, thereby many persons gain access to come study in the university.
No, it does not improve it in any way. How so?
Okay.
Yes, you should be able. What are you doing? You are not even looking for money to go to school. Sit down, read and pass.
Well, some persons are actually pay for their own tuition themselves.
Yes, some, very few.
No, not very few.
It might not be very few. It's few. It pales in comparison to parents who actually go all out to pay for their children's fees. Right. Sit down and write the exam. 200 is not too much. At least 200. So you are telling me that Premier University and all those OAU and all that will be bringing in students that had 150 over 400.
Wait, but there's another side to this story, right? Where and I'll give you a very practical example. I went for an interview one time, and we had to write an examination. And after writing that examination, it's very embarrassing to see what I scored. because again, some of the questions that were asked were not like in the strength or in the light of what I was applying for. That's not an excuse, but I mean, you prepare for examinations. And then the person who eventually scored the highest and eventually got the job left the job after a week, you know, and I was called back to fit in that position. Don't you think that it might also be an unfair judgment to say the person who didn't score up to 200, you know, for that examination is not fit to get into the university? Because in some cases, these people are actually fit. In, I think last month, there was a situation with JAM where some students went to write their examinations at the CBT center. They had 30 more minutes to go, and then everything just shut down completely.
Yes.
So there are cases like that, you know, because of some of the irregularities that have happened in that system before, you might not explicitly say that the person who scored 150 is not smart enough. Maybe there's a glitch. What if situations like this can contribute to them pegging the number?
Yes, like I believe that the test, the result of a test or examination is not the only test or criteria to say somebody is intelligent or brilliant or whatever, you know. Like you said too, there are glitches, yes, you know, but I still stand on it. I still believe so much that the average score for JAM should be 200 and not 150. You know why? When a student when you are aware that you need to get a particular number, a particular score for you to gain admission into the university, there's something it does to your psyche. You know, you sit down, you read. It helps you subsequently in school, in university, when you are writing exams. You know, I know some region, you know, in Nigeria where it could help because of family dynamics and all that, because they are not really exposed to education per se in the past. It's evolving, like I said, but I still believe that 150 shouldn't be.
Okay, I'll just follow up on that with this question. You said examination should not be the only way to determine whether a person is intelligent or not. Maybe we have such a heavy reliance on the UTME exams, you know, as a passage, as a means of passage into the university. What other ways do you think that the government can adopt so that this can happen?
Okay, universities in the past, I didn't do it during my own time. They usually do post UTME interviews, examinations. That's one of the ways it can be done.
Without getting to write an exam, you just have a conversation with the school.
No, it's an exam. Is it an exam? Post UTME, I think it's an exam.
Post
as well.
UTME, yes,
Still an exam,
it's an exam.
right. Okay.
So they can adopt a situation whereby maybe head of departments will interview each of the students, because some students, when there's exam, they just develop tension and other phobia and all that, and they might not be able to. I know someone that it happens to. When she writes exams, she will come immediately. She finishes the exam, she'll be like, "Oh, I knew the answer, but I was just tense, I was agitated, and I missed it." So that's why I said examination is not the only, and they say not the true. I said not the only true test of brilliance.
Let's talk about girl child advocacy right now, because you're also a girl child advocate. According to the report that you read earlier on as well, it stated that UNICEF data shows that in some regions, girls make up a large percentage of out-of-school children due to the early marriage and, of course, some cultural norms. Basically, this is 2026, and we still hear some of these things happen. What intervention or what policies do you think the government needs to put in place to serve as an intervention to these issues, stating that, of course, that young girls should not be forced into marriage, and, of course, some of those cultural norms should not be a yardstick or a deterring factor as to why young girls shouldn't get up to school?
Okay, so there shouldn't be gender disparity when it comes to the girl child being educated. It's more prevalent in villages, in, like I would say, the northern parts, and even in the southern parts. Gone are the days when some parents, especially fathers, believed that the girl child shouldn't be educated because she's going to end up in the kitchen. No, the narrative has really changed, evolved. So I say, educate a woman, thus a nation. You know, in the formative years, the woman is closer to the children, even some older children. The mother is closer to the children. So when a mother is educated, she knows the importance of education. She knows that it's going to help with the development, the growth, the dynamics, and everything of the family, of the child herself, for himself, and inadvertently, the nation. You know, it's going to affect the nation. So there shouldn't be that socio-cultural barrier to the girl child education should be nipped in the bud. We need to sensitize more the family, the parents, especially fathers, that a girl child should be educated. Yes, and there shouldn't be any disparity when it comes to. Some people believe, why should a girl child do engineering? Why should she be a medical being in medicine, you know, and all that? That shouldn't be it. There is no subject, there is no course that a girl child cannot undertake now.
Okay, let's do conclusively now. If you are advising the government directly, what would you identify as the 3 most urgent actions Nigeria must take to reduce the number of out-of-school children and to sanitize the educational sector?
The first is financial. There should be finances provided, scholarship. You know, they should make education free. They should make it free. These countries that we travel to, that we look up to, and all that, that is what is prevalent there. That is the intervention the government has given to its citizenry. You know, they give them free education. Let's make education free. Let's provide infrastructure for the schools. Let's train the teachers. You know, it's very important to train the teachers. And then let's provide data-driven system to help with the performance, the attendance, and all that of the students. Let's encourage them to be in school. Let's eradicate child labor. Anybody that takes up a child as a domestic help, a child that is less than 18 shouldn't be encouraged. You know, and then if you are going to, even if you are going to take up a child that is over 18, that is a young adult, as a maid, as a help in the house, then she'll be symbiotic. He or she provides the service while you help with vocational training. Yes, that's what I've been doing, and some people do that. You know, let him or her go for vocational training and not just be left in limbo. And then let's talk to the people in the north and some people in the villages. Children shouldn't be begging for alms. Give birth to only number of children. China did it. Children you can take care of. So that's basically it.
All right. Yes. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation this morning. We had Mrs. Aderemi Emmanuel-Oki. She is an educator and a girl child proponent. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the show this morning.
Thank you.
Definitely had a great time. Thank you. All right. The educational sector, there's a lot that can be done. A lot is going on. We've seen interventions here and there, but it is not enough to reduce the number of the out-of-school children. We need proactive measures to ensuring that these children have access to education. UNESCO consistently describes education as the fundamental human right of every child. Every child should have access to education. I think it's the least that a government can do for its people.
Very true. And of course, we keep calling on the government, just the federal government, the state government, and of course the local government. They've got to ensure that those within your community and your nation has got to go to school. Again, this education is the bedrock of every society, and if our foundation is not solid enough, then it makes that one already for the future.
All right, this is where we wrap it up on Rapid On this morning. Thank you for joining us. Remember, we're active across social media platforms on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, and on X. It is at Rapid TV. We have a YouTube page at Official Rapid TV that allows you to rewatch every single episode that we've had here on TV. Please go like, watch, share, and comment. Now, www.rbnradiotv.com allows you to connect with us from anywhere in the world. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Martha Alu.
And my name is Victor. Okay,
we'll see you tomorrow.